Now, before you go any farther in this presentation, you want to make sure that you read over your hiker fact set so that when we talk about the quotes we can use, you understand the story. So this is going to be a time where we need to decide now, how are we going to organize all this great information that we have? We have a great interview, we have a colorful speaker, we have lots of information. How do we organize it? How do we use direct and indirect quotes to tell our story? How do we weave those two together? So first you want to start with your raw interview. Look at what you've got. And you need to organize your story. So the first thing we have to do is decide what the story is about, right? So this is a story about an experienced hiker. He's a high school teacher. He was hiking alone on the Appalachian Trail. He went off the main trail, slipped in a stream, broke his leg, and then crawled back for 4 days to safety where 2 hikers found him. So by the time we get to the end of the second paragraph, we need to know that. Now, I would delay ID him. Second paragraph, you can tell us his name and more information about it. But it's good to know that he's not still crawling around the Appalachian Trail. So that's why by the time we get to the second paragraph, in an inverted pyramid story, we know the outcome. Once we get to that point, we want to decide how we're going to organize the rest of the story. Now, up to this point, we've talked about inverted pyramid going from most important to least important, but sometimes you can write an inverted pyramid top and then tell the story chronologically or by category. And that's a different type of story structure. It's called a turn, where we start the story one way for the benefit of our quick readers who just need to know the basic story, but then we go on and tell the story chronologically or by category because it makes more sense. So once we do that, you can decide here the story can really go either way, chronologically or by category. There are certain categories that he talked about of his experiences, and you can decide with your God-given common sense what you think should go first, second, third, and so forth. Really, sometimes it's just kind of what do I think, what do I have a feeling goes right. I hate to do that because we shouldn't live life by feelings, but you have enough knowledge of your audience to know what to do. So we're going to organize it, and then what I want you to do is go through each of those categories and pick a good heart and head direct quote. Now this can be a quote of more than one sentence, but it shows us what's in the subject's heart and head. And that's something we can't know unless he tells us. We can't see that. We might even imagine it incorrectly. So it's something that he needs to tell us. And so then you organize your story based on what happened and then what he thought about it and what he felt about it. So here's what I would do. So as you tell your story, first of all, you're going to use a fact-based statement. So something that we could see if we were hiding behind a bush and watching him crawl to safety, what is something that we can watch him do? And then follow it with his heart and head quote. So this is going to tell us something about what he felt. So for example, he talked about the items in his backpack that he discarded because it had gotten too wet and heavy for him to push, and he went into some detail there. That's something we can attribute to him, but we should paraphrase it because we can watch him do that. If we were at a distance and watched what he got rid of, that's something we could see. However, then we follow with his heart and head quote. He kept some things, and he tells us why he kept them. And that would go in its own paragraph, and that would be indirect quotes because it shows us what he felt and what he thought. Now let's write the top of the story. Let's review. So let's look at our hiker fact set and the possible indirect and direct quotes. So let's look at the categories of his journey. So right here we have 2 hikers found him, right? So that's one category. And indirect quotations is how did he get to that point, right? There's some things he had to do to get to a place where somebody could find him. So he created a splint for his leg and he pushed his 40-pound pack in front of him. And then direct quote, how did he feel about it? He said he never doubted that he would be found. And he said more about that, but that's the beginning of that section of direct quotations that you could use. He also described the foliage, right? And so indirectly paraphrased, we could tell you what the foliage looked like and why it was so thick. And again, if we were there, we could see that information. And then his direct quotations is that he realized that he would still be there if he didn't do something. And so he never thought about staying put. Even the part about the rangers telling him he wouldn't have been found, right? If we were there, we could hear that conversation, so we could indirectly quote that to him. Then another category is what he kept and what he got rid of. And so we can paraphrase his explanation of that because we could watch that happen. So that's not anything that is revealing his personality to us. But then he tells us why he kept what he kept and how it motivated him. Those are great direct quotations. And then another category is the lessons that he learned along the way. So he described the main trail and how it's always populated, and he told us his goal. Now you can directly or indirectly quote that too, but the big thing here is what he learned from his lesson. What he learned from his experiences. So you have some really good information here. You have some great background information, context. So tell us what he explained, what we could see if we were there, and then tell us how he felt. Tell us another category of what he did, what we could see if we were there, and then how did he feel, what did he think? So every time you do that, you provide context for his great heart and head quotes. So let's break down one chunk from our fact set into direct and indirect quotes. So here's the quote that I pulled from the fact set. And you don't have to follow what I'm saying here. In other words, when you write your story, feel free not to do it exactly the way I'm showing you. You can rewrite this. But this is a guideline. If you want to use it, that's fine. But it shows you what to do. So this is a quote from his interview that tells us what the mountain foliage was like, what the park rangers told him, and what he thought about it. So that's where we are here. Let's look at what we could see now from that chunk if we were there with him. So here's what we could see. The mountain foliage was thick like a jungle. There had been a lot of rain up there this year and it was really thick. If I had stayed where I was when I fell, I probably would still be there. At least that's what one of the park rangers said. So we can actually make this even a tad bit shorter. The mountain foliage was thick like a jungle because of heavy rains this year. Park rangers told him he would probably still be there if he stayed where he fell. So the beauty of paraphrasing is that we can often shorten the statements a little bit or clean them up. So you can do that here. Now let's look at the heart and head statements, those things that he was thinking along the way. So here's what he thought. And again, this is from that little piece we pulled from the fact set about his situation. So he said, I think I knew that instinctively when I fell, so I never thought about staying put. I knew that I had better be somewhere where people could find me. So that's a great direct quote that tells us what he was thinking in that moment when he was kind of scoping out what was around him and thinking about what he needed to do. Should he stay? Should he go? Right? But we need to properly punctuate this quote. So let's look at what we're going to do here. I think that instinctively when I fell, so I never thought about staying put, comma, close quote, Henderson said, period. So remember, when we have a quote, we put our attribution after the first sentence in a multi-sentence quote. And so the official end of that very first sentence is after the word said is where we're going to put our period. So it's going to look like this. And again, if it had more than these sentences, I would just continue on I only need to attribute that one time. So let's put what we did together and you'll see what it looks like. So here is the part of the story that is paraphrased. And if you want to attribute it to him, you can in here, that's okay. But really, when you paraphrase information, you're not obligated to use the exact words of the speaker. Paraphrasing is helpful because we can clean it up. We can add context maybe if we need to. Most of the stories that you write are paraphrased for that reason. But this is beautiful because now I can show you something and then I can tell you how he felt or what he thought. Show me something, let me hear what he thought or how he felt. And so you continue to weave that story together where we have the context and then we have the color. The context and then we have the color. Now remember, we're going to put our direct quotes in their own paragraphs. So this chunk right here gets its own paragraph. The next paragraph, I'm going to tell you what I would see, and then I will have a new paragraph where I tell you what he thought. So here's what your assignment is going to be. So you're going to write a story with an inverted pyramid top, and you're going to use the fact set about the hiker. You're going to write a lead and a second paragraph, and then you're going to weave together your story with indirect quotes to provide context and direct quotes to provide color, just the way I showed you. Now here's a note. I wanted to make sure that you understood this too. It's not going to be a traditional inverted pyramid because it's a chronological story. It would really be kind of odd for us to try to pick out most important to least important. And that's not unusual in news reporting. When you have a story that has some chronology in it, it makes sense to follow that chronology, right? But the top is inverted pyramid so that we can let people know right away what happened. If the person wants to continue, then we can tell them the rest of the story. Now, because it's hard to tell from most important to least important, you have to think about your audience, right? So by the time we get to the third paragraph, we've already told them at the beginning what we needed to tell them in the lead and second paragraph. So now in the third paragraph, I can start to tell the story chronologically. So use what you've learned here, what you've learned about direct and indirect quotations, watch your punctuation, have some fun with this story. These are really what writing is all about. When we get to tell other people's stories for them, it's quite an honor to be able to do that. So when we do that, we want to make sure that we represent them and what they said and how they felt and what they experienced in the most honest and straightforward way possible, but also to reveal their humanness and they're part of our community and their experience. So have some fun with this.